Good morning and welcome to today's webcast, Top Trending Cyber Threats for the Oil and Gas Industry. I'm pleased to introduce today's presenter from Moss Adams, Kevin Villanueva. Kevin is a partner with Moss Adams Cybersecurity Consulting. He has over 17 years of information security experience and over 20 years in IT. Kevin's practice areas include IT security assessments, penetration testing, HIPAA readiness assessments, PCI DSS audits, disaster recovery planning, and strategic technology planning. Throughout his career, he has led and served as technical counsel on hundreds of cybersecurity engagements based on industry-accepted best practice frameworks, ISO 27001, NIST 800-53, CIS, NIST, CSF, COBIT, and ITIL, among others. And with that, Kevin, I'll turn it over to you to get us started.
Great. Thanks, Emily. And thanks, everyone, for joining the webcast this morning. So the oil and gas industry has gotten a lot of media attention in recent years as being a big target for cyber criminals. With its characterization as a critical infrastructure industry, several nation-state adversaries and cyber terrorists have oil and gas companies in their sights to disrupt the supply chain or cause a more disastrous economic fallout. So in this webcast, we'll cover some of the cyber threats that oil and gas companies face as they look to leverage and integrate IT into the operational technology environment. So I have roughly about 30 or so slides to go over, so we'll go at a pretty good clip, and then hopefully at the end we'll have time for some question and answer period. So in our agenda here, we'll cover recent cyber attacks on oil and gas companies, mostly those that are upstream in the supply chain. Then we'll get into various cyber threats and their motives. Next, we'll shift to talk about the dichotomy between traditional IT and operating technology environments. We'll then talk about some of the common cyber attack methods used by cyber criminals. And then lastly, we'll go over some of the steps taken to minimize the risk of one of those methods being successful. And then again, hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end. So by the end of the webcast, hopefully you'll understand how the digitization of the operating technology environment is making oil and gas companies attractive targets. Hopefully you'll know how systems in the IT environment can introduce cyber risks to OT. Hopefully you'll recognize the methods cyber criminals can use to gain access to networks and systems. And then lastly, hopefully you'll be better aware of the tasks that can be taken to bolster overall cybersecurity posture of the company. So I always like to start off with some relatively recent cyber attacks in the industry. These are somewhat recent in the last couple of years, starting off with Rosneft. Rosneft was a Russian state oil company that was actually hit by the NotPetya ransomware attack from May of 2017. For those of you not familiar with NotPetya, NotPetya was a devastating ransomware attack that made headlines back in May of 2017 that spread to many large corporations over 65 countries, holding thousands of systems by ransom by encrypting the data on them. Fortunately for Rosneft at that time, the attack actually did not affect oil production. Saudi Aramco was not so fortunate. Back in December of 2017, what was thought to be a nation-state sponsored attack, a virus called the Triton virus took advantage of a misconfigured firewall to spread to the operating technology network and shut down safety controllers. This was actually the second major attack that Saudi Aramco had experienced in the last 5 years. Back in 2012, it was actually hit by the Shamoon virus. At that time, roughly 35,000 computers were impacted, and it actually took them 5 months to fully recover from that attack. And incidentally, that attack actually started when an employee opened up a phishing email and clicked on the infected link, which led to the virus, the Shamoon virus, being downloaded and executed. You could kind of consider that Saudi Aramco attack kind of the pinnacle cyber attack on the oil and gas industry, similar to what the Target attack did to the retail industry. Energy Transfer Partners, their third-party EDI service provider was attacked, causing a temporary disability to communicate with their customers. Thankfully, no operational systems were impacted and no data was compromised. But again, it just kind of showed that even your third parties could be an avenue of attack for cyber criminals. Lastly, Saipem, they're an Italian subsea engineering construction firm that was hit with a variant of the Shamoon virus. The Shamoon virus actually, once a machine is infected, it can actually destroy the files, erase data, and in some cases, cause the affected machines to not even start up. Again, this is the same virus that hit Saudi Aramco back in 2012 that brought down the 35,000 machines. There was no data that evidence was stolen, and again, production wasn't stopped, but it was definitely a severe attack that should be considered. This quote here, 68% of U.S. oil and gas firms experienced a cyber attack. This was back in 2017 from the Ponemon Institute, which is a cybersecurity research firm. So, really, that's, over 2/3 there of oil and gas firms that have actually experienced an attack. So, again, we expect probably figures from 2018 to inch higher, and again in 2019. So, really, who are the attackers, and what are their motives? Well, starting with the nation states, for those operating in the upstream segment of exploration and production, this is likely your top external threat. Nation state attacks try to disrupt the supply of oil and natural gas and cause a ripple effect to the target's economy. And so, a lot of the attacks I mentioned earlier were thought to be nation state sponsored attacks. In fact, one group, Elfin, is a hacking group, also known as APT, or Advanced Persistent Threat 33. They're a state-sponsored hacking group suspected to be situated in the Middle East. They've been active since 2015, and they mainly focus on targeting multiple sectors, but primarily energy. They target companies in Saudi Arabia and the United States, and they usually rely on social engineering tactics like spear phishing, with malicious payloads for an initial foothold into the environments. They seem to be initially interested in intelligence gathering, but have been shown to have destructive properties such as wiping systems, again, erasing data, and really just kind of making things difficult from a network and system standpoint. The cyber terrorists, they're really driven by the opportunity to undermine the economic state of a country. Their potential is they're essentially wanting to create a global impact. And so an example of a cyber terrorist is Xenotime. They're an actual hacking group known for its use of the Triton malware, which targets safety instrumented systems. Again, it's the same virus that attacked Saudi Aramco back in 2017. They were behind those oil and gas company attacks in Saudi Arabia in 2017. They actually gained remote access to safety instrumented systems workstation and was able to put that SIS controller into a fail-safe state, which caused automatic shutdowns of industrial processes. Now they're actually known to target the industrial control systems of power grids in the U.S. and the Asia-Pacific region, so they're very active. An activist, an example of them is like the Anonymous hacking group. I mean, we've seen certainly stories in the past a couple of years about Anonymous being active as far as defacing websites, changing websites around to kind of get their social message across. The malicious insider, this could be somebody in your own IT or operating technology team. It could be someone in another department that has some issue with the company that wants to do the company harm. So these are your own employees that might have malicious intent. The inadvertent insider, this is actually probably a top 2 or top 3 threat to the oil and gas industry, because it's often an employee that makes mistakes that introduces malware into the IT or OT environment. So if you think back to those examples that I mentioned, it was I believe again Saudi Aramco that had the misconfigured firewall that could have been taken advantage of by these attackers, and so likely it was misconfigured by one of the IT or OT staff, and so that caused the actual hack to materialize. So it's really kind of that human error or misconfiguration that causes these attacks to materialize. The hacker, this is really just an individual whose prime motive is really street cred among his or her fellow hackers. They're going to be the ones to brag about their exploits in the various hacker forums on the dark web and surface web. Lastly, the cyber criminal, their primary motive is money. They will use various techniques to extort money from you, including infecting machines with ransomware, stealing sensitive data for blackmail purposes, and even using voice-based attacks or phishing to trick a victim into paying a false invoice or distributing product or things like that. So if you think the federal government is actually proactively defending against these threats, you have a false sense of security, because really the onus is on the individual companies to ensure that their operations are protected against these threats. So let's look at some of these cyber threats and what could happen. In the oil and gas industry, there's certainly physical threats. In this case, if we take an oil rig, drone spying, airstrikes could occur. That's going to lead to oil rig loss as well as oil spills. A sensor that's publicly exposed to the internet, in the case of a tank management system, that could be a potential target for a hacker, where they can modify the data to report that the oil reservoir was actually full when in reality it was only 25% capacity. So what that impact is, the downstream companies, they don't receive resources and the supply chain is disrupted. With a lack of network segmentation in pipeline operations, pipeline sensors accessible from the corporate network could have data modified to make it look like a sensor reported a leak. Again, this disrupts the supply chain. Wasted resources could be used toward an investigation, and potential shutdowns could occur. A control center employee who might be subject to a social engineering attack, such as a phishing attack, where the employee clicks on a malicious link in an email, and then that link triggers some type of executable code that allows an attacker to gain access to the systems. That could certainly result in an increase in false negatives in the monitoring systems that would report like undetected spills or even cause equipment damage. And then lastly here, the industrial IoT or Internet of Things, where you have let's say a monitoring sensor that's considered an IoT device. If it has an outdated firmware, or essentially the operating system runs the device, if that lack of firmware does not get updated, to patch, let's say, a security hole, then that could result in an attacker exploiting that vulnerability. And then again, what results there is it could result in a command and control situation where the attacker has essentially control of the system, as well as be able to propagate to other systems on the network. The bottom line here is there's certainly a lot of avenues of attack for a cyber criminal or bad actor who wants to do malicious things to a targeted oil and gas company. And then again, these adversaries, if they're successful, it can result in production shutdowns, which naturally can cost millions in lost revenue, certainly reputational damage, and then even a decreased competitive advantage as well. So, what's really driving attacks on oil and gas? I think we probably need to get in the mind of a cyber criminal and kind of think the way he or she thinks. When they look at oil and gas companies, it's an attractive target that's vulnerable to cyber attacks. There's many valuable assets if you think about it. There's exploration information, production data, there's proprietary drilling techniques, employee data. Not to mention that oil and gas companies, especially those involved in E&P, are going to be ripe for ransomware attacks. There's the complexity of IT and OT environments that results in a larger attack surface. There's more processes here that are leveraging computer technologies, including cloud-based service providers for crunching big data, for example, big survey data. The industry is grappling as a whole with how to take advantage of advances in computing technology on the IT side while ensuring high availability and reliability of the operating technology side as far as the technology function. There's a lot of older legacy systems still in use in oil and gas. In fact, you still see Windows XP and older Windows Server technologies that are still pervasive in the industry. And a lot of these have already reached their end of life, and Microsoft is no longer developing security patches or security updates for them. You see quite a bit of those. A successful attack can lead to disastrous consequences. Again, so there's disruption in plant operations, there's equipment damage, erroneous data being shared, production stoppages. All of that can result as far as a successful attack. There's also potential for significant financial gain for these cyber criminals. They are betting that an oil and gas CEO will make the decision to pay the ransom in a ransomware attack rather than risk the extended production stoppage, because in the end they're going to think that a relatively small amount of money in Bitcoin or other cryptocurrency is going to pale in comparison to the lost revenue if there's a production stoppage. So what is really kind of behind, and is the oil and gas industry really lagging behind? Well, historically, oil and gas companies have not had to focus on cybersecurity. In fact, according to an April 2018 study by Precision Analytics and the CAP Group, which are two security research firms, energy companies invest less than 0.2% of their revenue in cybersecurity. This is far less than many other industries, and it's minuscule by comparison. There's been a lack of laws and regulations around cybersecurity, unlike other industries. So, you have HIPAA for healthcare, you have PCI DSS for merchants and service providers that take payment cards for payment, GLBA for banks and credit unions, and you have FISMA for government agencies. This only scratches the surface in terms of like other industry regulations, but where some of these regulations require the organization to report data breaches, oil and gas companies do not have to report on cyber attacks or breaches, and so there's that lost opportunity to share information and learn from each other and learn how to how to protect yourself against these types of attacks. Cyber defenses used in IT are not necessarily well suited for OT environments. So, for example, in IT environments, you see intrusion prevention systems that automate a response when an attack is detected. Well, in an OT environment, that automated response when an attack is detected may inadvertently trigger a shutdown of a key safety process, for example, as a reaction. And in the OT environment, we can't have that. So OT has always had a primary focus on safety, and safety has meant that systems need to be reliable and stable. So there can't be any type of interruption caused by other systems like an intrusion prevention system. Operational technology systems require not only IT, but engineering expertise in order to manage and maintain. So to be able to effectively manage and administer systems in both IT and operating technology environments, that's really a tall order. The technologies are very different, often non-standard, and often from various vendors that may not be interoperable or compatible with each other. And so that certainly creates a challenge in looking for that type of expertise. There's a talent shortage. OT and IT skills are hard to come by. IT expertise is hard enough to come by in today's job market, but add the need for operating technology skills in the same job candidate, and you might be actually looking for a golden unicorn in the job market. And this is part of the reason why oil and gas companies are turning to increased automation in production operations. So rather than spending huge amounts on getting that golden unicorn type of candidate, quickly turn to IoT devices and remote sensor technologies and remote monitoring technologies to really kind of take the place of that OT administrator. So I think we have to touch upon the operational technology and the rise of digitization in the industry. As the industry has struggled with cost cuts, I mean, think back to like 2014 when there was a massive drop in oil prices due to the slowing economies of China, India, and Brazil. The industry was forced to turn to more technological advances to help raise revenue and net income. And 5 years or so ago, certainly there's been some significant changes in the uses of technology, particularly those systems based on Internet Protocol or IP that are more Internet-facing. Back then, legacy systems were installed when cybersecurity was not much of a concern across the industry. However, now the integration of IP networking on the operational technology side has made cybersecurity a necessity. You think about these industrial Internet of Things sensor and enhanced monitoring technologies that have resulted in more connected systems that are in place for the exchange of data between the OT and IT side, as well as feeding data into like your ERP systems like SAP. This has introduced more avenues of attack and expanded the attack surface for cyber criminals and those who want to do harm to the company. So no longer are those ICS systems or those systems that run the plant are air gapped. There's typically connectivity between the two sides, between OT and IT, that again adds to that expanded attack surface. The changing IT and OT landscape. We're seeing more companies providing remote access to systems on the OT side that have brought operating efficiencies, but the connectivity to that outside world has introduced these cyber threats to the ICS and SCADA environments. And unfortunately, the implementation of cybersecurity controls on the OT side really has not followed. And then, consequently, the entire organization becomes vulnerable to a cybersecurity attack. Lastly, we'll just cover real quickly here IT versus OT. So it's been a challenge for the industry to fully embrace IT just because the drivers behind the use of IT versus OT were in contrast to each other. So, one of the primary goals of IT is to really protect computing assets and data, whereas in OT environments, you're really out to protect the physical environment. In information technology, the three information security tenets of confidentiality, integrity, and availability are paramount, whereas for operating technology, it's really safety, reliability, and stability that are critical and of utmost importance. In IT, you see constantly changing technologies. I mean, software providers and hardware providers are coming out with new products all the time, whereas in OT, you usually see like aging infrastructure and non-standard equipment that are not the same as you'd see in corporate IT environments. In IT, you got servers and devices often configured for multiple functions, whereas in the OT side, you see many single-use or single-function devices. In the IT side, you have to apply a lot of software updates to enhance functionality and security of a system or device, whereas on the OT side, you really can't have that because some of these systems really can experience unexpected or unplanned downtime to apply updates and patches. And so, however, because there's a mixing of IT systems with OT systems, there's more of that dependency between them, and interoperability and access is essential to the business. So, quite a challenge ahead of for oil and gas companies. Now we're going to look at some of the different cyber attack methods used by cyber criminals to attack networks and systems and get access to data or disrupt operations. So there's a lot on this slide, but I won't go through all of these. I'll just touch upon these briefly before we actually delve into a few of them. But cryptojacking, really, this is kind of a relatively new term. It's really the undetected use of a victim's computer resources to mine cryptocurrency like Bitcoin or Monero. This actually incidentally replaced or offset ransomware as the #1 cyber threat or cyber attack method in 2018. So really the cyber criminals were really more targeting systems to commandeer them for the use of mining cryptocurrency and using those resources to essentially jack up your utility bills and really kind of overwork your systems to the point where they almost cause an inadvertent denial of service attack. Ransomware, I think we've all heard of this one. It's certainly gotten a lot of press lately in the last 3 years. This is when a hacker infects your computer and renders the hard drive or specific data files unreadable through the use of strong encryption, forcing the victim to pay the ransom, typically in cryptocurrency, in order to receive the decryption key. Spear phishing and phishing and whaling and CEO fraud, we're going to get into that here in the next couple of slides, but this is where a hacker targets individuals via email in order to spur action to further the hacker's nefarious purposes, such as providing login information, sensitive information, or the wiring of money. Fileless attacks, actually this might be a relatively new term for some of you, but this is essentially malware that doesn't get installed on a hard drive. and therefore it's really undetectable by traditional antivirus or endpoint protection. And this is really gaining traction amongst cyber criminals and attackers because it really takes advantage of already inherent built-in management resources within the Windows operating system, like PowerShell, Windows Management Instrumentation, or WMI, as well as things like the Windows Registry. IoT, or Internet of Things. This isn't really a type of attack, but it's really technology that we're seeing increasingly becoming a target for attackers as an ingress point to your network and systems. So IoT technologies that's used quite a bit in the oil and gas industry for remote monitoring, remote sensing, and so we'll talk about this in the next few slides as well. So I'm going to actually cover phishing, fileless attacks, and then the threats from IoT devices. So let's talk about phishing. So phishing really is a form of social engineering. It's social engineering. It's the art of manipulating people into performing an action or divulging confidential information. The techniques include email phishing, social networks, exploiting individuals through social networks, phone call impersonation or vishing, as well as physical site access as a social engineering technique. Like if you think about, when you're walking into a building and let's say you have an individual behind you who might be carrying a heavy load like a box, and you naturally get the door for them and allow them inside. That's really the type of attitude that cyber criminals want to target because, inherently I think we as humans just want to help each other, and really cyber criminals are banking on that sentiment that we want to help each other. So it preys on that natural inclination to trust and help others. This quote down below: amateurs hack systems, professionals hack people. That's, as a cybersecurity professional, that's one of my favorite quotes. I don't know who the author is, but it's true. Professionals hack people, and it's really because people are often the weakest link in the cybersecurity chain, and they're the path of least resistance. Why bang away on a keyboard trying to hack into a web server when you can just make a few phone calls, target a few phishing emails to target certain individuals to try to gain access to systems and networks through that channel. So here's an example, and I guess unless you've always shunned email as a form of communication, there's no doubt that you've been a target of a phishing attack. I mean, they're just that pervasive, that ubiquitous. So this one is an example of one that supposedly was sent by the IRS. However, the IRS does not correspond via email. They only correspond via U.S. mail, snail mail, so keep that in mind. But it looks pretty legitimate. And in fact, in this case, you're for the recipient, they're saying that they do a refund of roughly $319. You need to set up an account, an e-refund account, in order to get access to those funds. And so, here's a link to get started. But in this case, as with any type of phishing email, if you hover over some of these embedded links within the email, you'll see that they're actually diverting you to another website, which could be totally unrelated to who you think is the legitimate source of the email, but it might divert you to an infected website that could install a malicious program in the background, or somehow even install like cryptojacking programs within your own system to try to use your systems for mining cryptocurrency. So there's those things that definitely leverage where cyber criminals definitely leverage phishing attacks in order to gain access to your system. So again, phishing, it's an email fraud method in which the perpetrator sends out that legitimate-looking email in an attempt to gather personal and financial information from the recipient. It usually involves a problem that requires you to take immediate action and verify or send personal information, money, or data. So if you think back at our example, in the prior phishing example, the recipient gets an email from the IRS saying that an error was made resulting in an overpayment, so that's the problem. It then states that you must create an e-refund account, which includes providing that banking information or that personally identifiable information in order to get the refund. That's the immediate action they want you to take. And then the e-refund account information, bank account information provides that verification of personal information. So again, that IRS phishing example, that has all the components of a good phishing email. The three basic types of attacks, phishing attacks, are blanket, which essentially is blasting out to the entire end user population. Spear phishing, which targets certain individuals, like typically those in accounting or customer service. And then whaling, which is CEO fraud, which other names for that include business email compromise. It's where a cyber criminal sends a phishing email that looks like it's coming from the CEO or CFO, asking for a funds transfer or immediate wiring of funds. Very vague, very short, to the point, and it usually has some sort of immediacy to it as well to trigger action. So again, this is definitely an avenue that a lot of cyber criminals like to use in order to target oil and gas company employees. And so how do you stop it? Well, there's a number of different things, both technical and administrative, that you could do in order to prevent phishing attacks. On the technical side, and your IT staff should know quite a bit of this, is implement those antivirus and spam filtering on the mail servers. So where your email comes in, there's software out there that would actually verify whether or not an email is coming from a legitimate source. So a lot of the times in phishing attacks, the email is spoofed or faked. And so mail servers with this type of protection will actually filter those out and just, put them in junk mails or put them on blacklists so that any further emails from that email domain do not actually get sent to the company. Use antivirus or endpoint protection software on all workstations and ensure that it's updated constantly, because even when an employee goes to an infected website, antivirus will typically stop the attack from materializing, such as a malicious code being downloaded to the individual's workstation. So good antivirus will prevent that. Patch workstations so that malware doesn't spread. A lot of these malware or malicious code that gets downloaded via phishing attack, it's usually a result. They're usually successful because the system is not patched or updated with the latest security patches from the manufacturer. So make sure your workstations and servers are patched with latest security updates from the manufacturer. This is kind of a new one. Register all company domains that are slightly different from the actual company domain. So, cyber criminals and those that use phishing attacks, they usually change the domain name or usually spoof the domain name by changing one or two characters in the domain, the actual domain name itself. So, for example, Moss Adams, they might change the O into a zero, might change one of the S's into like a $sign. So something that the casual email user may not notice right away. And so if you register those different variants of your email domain, that could prevent cyber criminals or attackers from using that particular domain in order to attack your company. Some of the administrative controls that you could do. Having robust security awareness training program, make sure that the training program covers recognizing phishing emails, teach your employees not to click on embedded links, don't open email attachments from unknown senders, and then test users periodically, like actually test them by sending out simulated phishing emails. And you can use like a third party. There's certainly web-based services that could do this for you, or third parties that you could contract with to actually do this on a regular basis. But it's often a good way to see which departments or which individuals could use further security awareness training to be aware of and recognize phishing attacks if they're tested on a periodic basis, typically like quarterly. Make sure executive management and finance accounting staff attend, because, again, they're typically the ones who are going to be targeted in phishing attacks, especially spear phishing attacks. And then require proper documentation and approvals for all wire transfers and ensure that all approvals are met before wire transfers are initiated. This is usually just an internal control procedure that needs to be implemented rather than a technical one or administrative one regarding cybersecurity. But really having that verification step to legitimize the source that's requesting via wire transfer. That's going to go a long way into protecting yourself and protecting and hopefully not being subject to a phishing attack. So let's talk about fileless attacks. So it's also fileless attacks. They're also known as non-malware or zero footprint attacks because they actually differ from traditional malware in that it doesn't actually need to install the program on your hard drive. So unlike traditional viruses that get installed on the hard drive and can get detected by enterprise antivirus programs, a fileless attack only stores and runs in memory, so only in RAM. And essentially what that means is it's undetectable by traditional antivirus software. And so this is a very difficult type of attack to detect just because it doesn't rely upon traditional antivirus software to actually detect and thwart attacks of this nature. And so what fileless attacks does, actually I'll go over that in the next slide, but the point is it's not easily detectable, and in fact the use by cyber criminals is increasing. And we're seeing more and more of them. These stats from the Ponemon Institute, 42% of companies surveyed from this 2017 survey reported experiencing at least one fileless malware attack. The respondents also said around 30% of their attacks were fileless. So I expect to see that number increase when 2018 results reporting comes in. And then 77% of all successful attacks were fileless. So again, you're seeing that stat as a validation that cyber criminals are leveraging fileless attacks in order to get access to systems and data. So they're using this technique more often. So the way this really kind of works is, a lot of the activity that the fileless attack takes advantage of looks innocuous to anybody else because it's really kind of mimicking some of the stuff that system administrators do. So logs showing the activity, it's not as heavily scrutinized because a system administrator would use some of the built-in Windows tools like PowerShell, like WMI, like accessing the registry keys that really would not look unusual in a normal setting. And so the way this works is, let's say a user is going to receive a spam message from a cyber criminal that has a link to a malicious web page. The user clicks on the link, gets diverted to that malicious web page, and then that malicious website uses vulnerable software on the computer, on the user's computer, to actually download and essentially store the malicious payload in memory. That vulnerable software, it opens up, again, these built-in Windows tools like Windows PowerShell. PowerShell then executes the code itself to trigger some type of action or trigger some payload. It downloads a script to execute, and then in this case, it's with a command and control server. So this is really a machine that the cyber criminal or attacker uses in order to remotely access the machine to do, to steal data, to erase data, to use it as a jump-off point to get access to other systems in the network. And then, so the PowerShell script, in the end, it locates and sends user data to the attacker, or again, other information about the network that can be used for a more expanded attack. And so this is truly a devastating attack if you do get affected by it, because it really lives off the land. I mean, it's already using those existing Windows programs that again seem innocuous and are normal use by system administrators. But again, once the fileless attack happens, then it's really very hard to detect. So really, how do you defend against fileless attacks? Well, if you can, disable Windows services that are not needed. Not everybody is going to need PowerShell. It's a system administration tool, so really probably only those individuals in IT that need access to it. Establish a baseline of typical Windows performance and be familiar with the other behavior of built-in tools. So, if you see, for example, PowerShell script running as a service, that's really a no-no. That really shouldn't happen. But for a typical Windows user and a Windows performance, really kind of understand and acknowledge what a normal activity is, and really kind of establish that as a baseline to compare against. Patch your systems and make sure the software is up to date. Again, a lot of cyber criminals and malicious code will take advantage of vulnerable systems because they're unpatched. Disable Office macros if it's not necessary to do one's job. I understand that this is really difficult to do because a lot of our programs do depend on the macro functionality within the programs within Office. But if they're not needed, then certainly disable them. Educate your users through regular security awareness training. They're going to be your first line of defense against this type of activity. And then segment your network to help prevent or deter the spread of malicious programs. And we'll kind of go over network segmentation a little bit later in the slide deck. So let's switch gears. Let's talk about the Internet of Things, or IoT, and botnets. So if we think about IoT, most people don't think of IoT devices as computers. If you think about it in consumers' terms, IoT can be thought of as anything that's labeled smart or has that marketing monitor as smart computing device. They often actually come with a stripped-down version of Linux as the operating system and are usually run on wireless networks. So some of these examples include, for example, some of that remote sensing technology used for monitoring oil rigs, smart video conferencing systems, RFID systems for inventorying supplies, home routers, vending machines that have sensors in them to detect when they're almost empty, baby monitors, HVAC monitoring systems, medical devices. These are all examples of IoT devices, and you can recognize them by their characteristics. They're limited processing power devices. They're usually triggered by a sensor. Actuators are usually involved in the functionality, and they're often involved with machine-to-machine communication. So, humans don't often interact with the IoT devices on a daily basis because it's usually triggered by machine-to-machine communication. So, they only have enough processing power to do what they're designed to do and nothing more. And so, consequently, these IoT devices, they do not have the power to run antivirus, for example, or other traditional technical security measures. So, for example, your Ring video doorbell does not have the power or functionality to support other security measures like antivirus, and yet it's still an attack target. This stat here on the side, 22 billion. I mean, actually, depending on who you read, it's estimated that the number of IoT devices are going to be active or expected to grow to 10 billion by 2020. So in one short year, and 22 billion by 2025. I've actually heard that this could be even up to 50 billion by 2025, and I think that was Cisco's estimate. So again, depending on who you read and who you believe, there's certainly big growth in IoT devices. It's just a matter of how much between what you read. So let's talk about bots or botnets. So bots are computer programs that automate the process for a user, whereas a botnet is an army of computers under the remote control of an individual, an attacker, or cyber criminal. In essence, a botnet acts like a supercomputer for criminal purposes, and it's often used for things like a distributed denial of service attack and things of that nature. A good bot example actually is a search engine spider that scours the web and indexes new web pages for a search engine. So, Google uses this type of technology for better purposes. An example of a botnet attack that was really devastating was back in September 2016 when there was a distributed denial of service attack on the internet back on the U.S. East Coast, where a segment was attacked by the Mirai botnet. And Mirai was a botnet a program that scanned for insecure IoT devices by scanning these big blocks of the internet for open telnet ports. and they essentially the attack essentially used 61 default passwords that are frequently used for IoT devices to gain access. So it actually leveraged different devices like printers, IP-based cameras, home routers, even baby monitors were infected with the Mirai botnet and were used to attack an internet infrastructure service called Dyn, a company that provides DNS services to a lot of big websites like Netflix, Reddit, CNN, among others. And they actually, the Mirai botnet actually took those sites offline for several hours while they tried to recover from this attack. So it could be pretty devastating. So how do you defend against IoT and botnet attacks? Well, number one is to change the default passwords to these IoT devices. So, a lot of them come with naturally a default password to gain administrative access to the device. Always change those once you configure them and get them implemented. I think a lot of times we leave these devices as is and think that they're not going to be a target. Well, obviously they are going to be a target. If they're things even like a baby monitor, as we discussed with that Dyn attack. Harden the devices if possible. So if there's any ability to disable unused functionality or things that are not needed, services that are not needed on the device, if you can disable them, certainly do that, and that'll harden it against attacks and takeovers by cyber criminals. Remove protocols that are not needed. Ensure the firmware is updated regularly. So even at the time when these things go into implementation, there might be updated firmware that's available by the manufacturer. If you can update it, certainly do that at the time, so that way it's got the latest security patches and it can be deployed securely. If you can, segment the IoT devices from the corporate network. So actually having a separate network for things like a video conferencing system, like a remote vending machine, remote access vending machine. Having those devices on a separate corporate, separated from the corporate network, will essentially buffer things like your ERP system, like SAP, against attacks that might take advantage of IoT system vulnerabilities. So something to keep in mind there. We'll go over segmentation here in a little bit. So let's talk about things that you can do or actionable steps. Really, it kind of comes down to baby steps. You first off want to identify, inventory all assets so you know exactly what to protect. Identify that data that is critical to your operations, and these could include data feeds from the OT side that may be inputs into your ERP systems. Understand your data flows and potential threats and vulnerabilities along its life cycle. So start off with understanding where that data is acquired, where it's getting processed, what systems actually store that data, and then if it's getting transmitted to other systems or outside of your network, understanding where that egress point is. And so when you trace that life cycle of that data, you're trying to get an understanding of the potential threats along the life cycle, what controls in place do we have in place to prevent those threats from materializing, and then what other mitigating controls do we have to essentially reduce the risk of that data being compromised or being accessed by an unauthorized party. Create protected zones within the IT and OT environment to isolate data flows. So in a couple of slides, I'll show you an example of this with a diagram from the ISA/IEC 62443 standard, which some of you may be familiar with. Implement robust security monitoring controls. A SIEM device or a security information and event management system pulls log data from several key systems like your firewalls, your database servers, authentication servers, remote access devices, etc. And it actually will monitor them for any type of anomalous or unauthorized activity. But you still have to monitor them. I mean, even though you have a system that will collect and aggregate all these logs from all these different disparate systems, you still need somebody to actually review them and take a look at them on a periodic basis. Train your employees to recognize social engineering attacks and attempts. I think if I had any budget for cybersecurity services that this would likely be first where I'd spend my money, is actually training my employee base to recognize things like phishing attacks, educating them on the need for strong passwords, having them understand what to do in the event that they think that their system has been subject to a ransomware attack. They're going to be your first line of defense. So having that first line of defense strengthened through security awareness training is pretty critical. Test your protections and incident response plans accordingly. So testing often uncovers shortcomings and gaps in your security mechanisms and incident response plans. So a lot of the times when going through an incident response plan, there might be things that do not get considered, like the need for example, external help or expertise to assist in an investigation. So really kind of doing a tabletop test with your incident response plan and those parties or stakeholders that would be involved in the process would be key there. Also do regular penetration testing of your network defenses. So really understanding whether or not your network and systems are impervious to an external hacking attack. Really the only way you can do that is through regular penetration testing or ethical hacking, where essentially either your IT staff or an external party can actually simulate the types of activities that a real-world hacker would take in order to breach your systems. There's certainly a number of best practice guidance resources out there. There's a ton of them. I mean, here are just a few of them, but these are all vendor agnostic and industry accepted best practice guidance documents. The NIST cybersecurity framework, or NIST CSF, that came about back during the Obama administration in 2013. This is really a great framework for general cybersecurity best practices, and it's actually been widely adopted by some natural gas pipeline operators as well. But it's really designed to complement existing organizations' cybersecurity programs and recommend some good guidance as far as like protecting critical business data and sensitive data. And so this isn't only adopted by industries that are considered critical infrastructure like oil and gas, but even non-critical critical industries have adopted this as just a good overall best practice. Some that are oil and gas specific are the Department of Energy Oil and Natural Gas Cybersecurity Capability Maturity Model, or DOE ONG C2MG. This is really a good comprehensive one for oil and gas, in that it was really developed to improve security in the energy sector. It includes both IT and OT cybersecurity best practice, so it really covers both sides of the house. It allows for benchmarking for cybersecurity capabilities, and it will help oil and gas companies prioritize actions and investments toward improved cybersecurity. So again, that's going to really kind of help as you look at your environment and where to improve. This provides some guidance on prioritizing where you should spend your dollars. The ISA IEC 62443 standard, the security for industrial automation and control systems, is actually a good one as well. These have the technical security requirements for industrial automation and control system components. So this provides the cybersecurity technical requirements for components that make up such an environment, such as embedded devices, network and host components, and other software applications that are related. Lastly, this NIST SP, or Special Publication 800-82, the Guide to Industrial Control System Security, which was recently revised in February 2015. This document actually provides good guidance that's specifically applicable to your operating technology environment. So again, some really good authoritative, vendor agnostic, and industry accepted guidance here that you can pull from. So I wanted to just quickly give an example of what you can expect out of these best practice guidance from these resources. So this actually is a diagram taken from the ISA IEC 62443 standard as an example of good network segmentation. So if you look at this diagram, it follows the idea of creating different zones based on operational function, process level, and security requirements. So in this one, you see that process information network, or that PIN network, that actually serves as a buffer between the enterprise or corporate side, where your ERP system sits, versus in between the operating technology side. So that's where all that the lower half of the diagram is, where all the different zones are segmented. And some of these show the conduits. These conduits they're marked red in the diagram, and this is really the path for the flow of information between two zones. And a lot of these paths, these conduits, are just one-way communication, so that, for example, if one segment gets infected, then it's a good chance that other zones will not be infected by a malware attack, because there's rules that essentially govern the flow of data between the zones, or like I'm saying, some of them might be only communicating one way. So these conduits or zones they're typically secured with either a firewall or router or some type of packet filtering device. So again, I just wanted to show this as an example of the best practice that you can see from some of these frameworks and what they provide. So this is our last slide. Some of the takeaways that you should consider is attacks will continue to evolve in sophistication. In fact, cyber criminals are continually looking for ways to breach a system and get access to valuable data. And in fact, attacks involving artificial intelligence, which we didn't touch upon, that will actually increase. In fact, last week, it was reported that the CEO of a UK-based energy company was tricked into sending the equivalent of $243,000 to a cyber criminal who used an AI-generated voice impersonation program of the parent company CEO to request a funds transfer. So they're actually using artificial intelligence now to do voice impersonations of authoritative individuals. So that's pretty scary to think about it. So again, they're always one step ahead, always thinking of new innovative ways in order to gain access to data and essentially steal from you. Seek guidance from the various best practice resources available. Again, there's solid guidance out there. The prior couple slides showed that it's widely available or free. The two notable ones are that Department of Energy ONG C2MG one, and the NIST SP 800-82, that Guide to Industrial Control Systems Security, are two of really good ones. Bridge the gap between IT and OT by adopting similar cybersecurity practices. So adopt a vulnerability management program for both. So typically you only see that on the IT side, but a vulnerability management program that applies also to the OT side, where you get into, if possible, a system of patching, some of the OT systems, if a maintenance window can be established. Hold your business partners to the same standard of cybersecurity in their enterprise. So be aware that cyber risk in the supply chain that your business partners may introduce to your environment, especially provide them with persistent remote access or physical access to your environment. So, maybe some oil field services providers and service providers might have persistent access to your plan or operations. You want to hold them to the same security standard that you are held to. Educate your workforce to the threats and risks, particularly as they relate to oil and gas. Institute security awareness training into your risk mitigation strategies. So this should be actually part of your overall risk mitigation strategy, because again, employees will always be your first line of defense. And then lastly, stay vigilant and informed. And you can do this by subscribing to a number of different cybersecurity related newsletters that provide recent updates via email. And so always stay educated and stay aware. So with that, we'll go to questions, and let's see. I'll see if we have any. Actually, it looks like, Emily, we did not get any questions through the Q&A chat.
All right. Well, in that case, if you do have questions for Kevin that you think of, you can reach out to him directly here. And thank you, Kevin, for a great presentation today. Certainly a lot of material to cover. Yes.
And again, if you do have questions, certainly don't hesitate to reach out. There's my email address and phone number on this last slide.
All right. Thank you again.
Thanks, Emily. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
And here is a link to an online survey where you can provide feedback for today's presentation. Please take a moment to complete this survey as your feedback is very important to us. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you'll join us again next time.